In the previous lesson, we used the createElement method from React to create a React element representing an anchor tag. And we learned that the first argument to the createElement method is a string representing that eventual HTML element. Remember, when React creates this React element, it doesn't exist in a visual sense. It just exists as this React element, basically a simple JavaScript object that keeps track of this idea that it's supposed to represent this piece in a virtual DOM, this piece that represents an anchor tag, right? And then when it's time for React to reconcile that virtual DOM with the real DOM, it creates a real DOM node, a real anchor tag, and actually places that on the DOM, which is what we see appear in the browser. So in this lesson, I want to talk about the second argument that we can pass to the createElement method. As we can see from this working example, it is optional, but the second argument is going to be the props that we want to pass to this React element. And when it comes to having a basic React element representing a HTML building block like an anchor tag, we can almost think of the props as being analogous to attributes. So for example, what are some of the attributes that we may want to add to an anchor tag if we were building it up from scratch in an HTML file? Well, we might want to add an href to direct the hyperlink where it's going to go. We might add a class, right? And we might add something like target blank to make sure that when somebody clicks the anchor tag, it opens in a new tab. These are all regular attributes, just like these we have right here in Meta, that we would write in line. But here, we don't have the concept of writing an HTML element in line, right? Because we are in the world of JavaScript and in the world of React. So the second argument here is going to be an object representing those attributes, which we can also think of as props to this vanilla HTML element, right? It's not technically an HTML element at this point, it's a React element, but it's an object that's trying to capture the spirit of an eventual real-world HTML element. So what I'm going to do here is just provide three attributes as three properties to this object. So once again, in the real world, I might write something like this, a href, right? We don't have that, so here we're instead going to provide href as a property on this object. And this object is going to be the second argument to our createElement method call. So let's say I want this to go to Wikipedia, so I will just provide a URL of wikipedia.org. Let's add a www to be formal. So once again, at this point, React has not created an HTML node that looks like this, but we have a React element object that will represent that idea until it needs to eventually be rendered, at which point React will translate that React element into an actual DOM node that looks like this. So we're kind of building this up in a proto sense. We're like laying the foundation for something that will be an eventual real world thing, but only in the land of JavaScript, right? And that's what this href is representing. It is a property on an object, and those properties will be the attributes that we attach to the eventual DOM node when it exists. So right here, I can add a couple more. For example, I can say that I want a class of Redbox, and because we are in the world of React, we do have to use class name here. So I'm going to say here that React, when you eventually add this anchor tag and you transform it from a React element to a DOM node element, please give it this class of Redbox. And React will automatically translate that class name to an actual class attribute on the eventual anchor tag that it does create. The final one I want to add here is just one more property. We're going to do target, and we're going to do underscore blank. This is not a React specific idea. This is just something that you can add to an anchor tag to ensure that when you click it, it will open up a new tab in your browser instead of navigating on the current page. The other thing I want to do is I want to console log anchor tag React element just so we can see what it looks like in our browser console. But otherwise, the remainder of the code will remain the same. We're going to target the div with an ID of root. We're going to create sort of a root of a React application right here using React DOM. And then we're going to tell that root to render some React element, which is now this anchor tag. And because we now have that second argument representing the attributes, these attributes will now be present when we look at the real anchor tag in our DOM. So right here, the page should have automatically refreshed. So if I go to my element screen and I expand my div with an ID of root, you can see our anchor tag now has those exact three object properties, but now in the world of the browser, in the world of real DOM nodes, they are actual attributes on the DOM node right here. Here's the href, here's the class, which React has translated from class name, and here is the target attribute. Now, it's important to note how this looks and compare it to how React is storing it in its internal element object, which we conveniently output right here. So if I expand this object, you can see it's just a plain JavaScript object with properties, right? And you'll notice it's going to have a props property, and that's going to be an object with the exact same values that we just saw as attributes on the DOM. We kind of looked at it in maybe the wrong order because we started with the DOM and then transitioned to the React element. Obviously, in the real world, it goes the other way. React starts with this object, which is, again, a kind of a representation of something that will eventually live as a DOM node, but it only exists as a React element in the virtual DOM. And then React says, hey, my virtual DOM is out of sync with the real DOM. This thing needs a real anchor tag, and it's going to use these properties to translate that into an actual anchor tag DOM node in the DOM, which becomes what we see in the browser. Right now, we don't have any visual output because that anchor tag does not have any text, but it does exist as we proved it right here. So React has reconciled and rendered it to the DOM. But you can see, going back to our earlier examples, keeping track of an element in an object like this in pure JavaScript is a lot less expensive than keeping track of everything via nodes, because those nodes have a visual component that is kind of intrinsically linked to the user interface. Right now, this object can exist totally by itself. Imagine again that we got rid of all these lines of code right here. React has a smaller, more lightweight object representing an anchor tag element with these eventual attributes that it needs to have, but it's able to deal with it as a purely JavaScript-related construct rather than as a visual construct, which allows the virtual DOM to be much quicker and faster and worth creating in the React ecosystem compared to the actual real browser DOM, which consists of real nodes that do have actual visual components, right? So that's what allows React to reconcile really quickly. It's just going to do all the logic in JavaScript and its speed, and it doesn't have to deal with the but the rendering aspect of things. Then when it's done reconciling and getting the final version of the virtual DOM and how it should look, then it compares it, and then it swaps elements and properties and things like that to get the real DOM to look and match with the virtual DOM consisting of React elements. All right, so more progress on the create element method. We're going to continue exploring more about this method in the next couple lessons, and I will see you there.